Hi, my name's Chris from Driver Training Limited, and in today's video, we're going to give you an example of a briefing that you could do for moving off and stopping. At the end, we'll do some common faults and also how to do it if they've got experience. So, as always, in our briefing folder, the left page is the lesson structure. So, the first thing we need to do is do a recap. Have they done this last week, for instance? So everything we could do would be question and answer. Have they got any experience with doing this? Have they driven but only in a car park? Have they driven with mom, dad, or family members and friends, but haven't really done this as a routine before driving off? We need to know so we know where to set the standard for the instruction and the briefing that we're going to give. The next part then is the goals for the lesson. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to prepare the vehicle to move from a parked position at the side of the road, make effective observations using the POM routine, which I'll explain, and you'll also be able to move away under control and take up a safe position in the road. Now, there are two halves to this. So the second part then is pulling up on the left. So by the end of today's lesson, you should be able to identify a safe, legal, and convenient place to pull up on the left using the MSPSGL routine. You're going to be able to bring the vehicle to a controlled stop, and it's going to be close to and parallel with the left curb. So that's the overview of today's lesson. So how do we do it then? Well, what we're going to do, if you look at the pictures on the right, we're going to prepare the car to move off. This is the POM routine. So the first part, prepare. So we're going to press the clutch down. We're going to go into first gear. We're going to get the bite point. Remember, we discussed that, where the engine noise changes and the front of the car lifts slightly. Then the second picture from the bottom is the next part of our routine. We've done preparation, now observation. So we're going to check the center mirror so we know what's coming from behind and how close or how quickly it's coming. We're going to check the right mirror to see if anybody is already overtaking us. Then we're going to look into the right blind spot. And we mentioned that and talked about that earlier, didn't we? That's the part that we can't see in our mirrors. Then we're going to signal up. And then the final part of our routine is our movement. So we're going to keep the clutch at the bite point. We're going to release the handbrake. And then remember, we're going to think of that steering like a clock face. And we're going to steer 2, we're going to steer to 10, we're going to steer to 12. And that will put us in the correct road position. And again, once we're there, I'll give you a focal point for that. Then we're just going to cancel the signal, and then we're going to look for somewhere on the left to pull up. Okay, Chris, so does that make sense so far? Any questions, anything that you're not sure of with what we've just mentioned? So now then, let's go on to the stopping on the left. How do we do that? Well, the first thing we need to do is identify a safe, legal, and convenient place to pull up on the left. So that's the small pictures on the left of your diagrams there, Chris. So safe would mean that we don't park on the brow of a hill, perhaps, on a bend or opposite a junction. Legal. Well, are there any road markings? If you look at those small pictures, we've got zigzag lines. Do we know what those mean, Chris? We've got double yellow lines. We've got the red cross on the blue background. If you don't know what that one means, Chris, that means you need to do more work on your theory test. No, I'm only joking. That means, again, no stopping for any reason, even to just drop a mate off or pick one up. The yellow box is the waiting restriction time. Again, the brow of the hill, a steep incline, we wouldn't want to park, or at a point where the road narrows. And is it convenient? Well, we wouldn't want to park outside or over somebody's driveway, which potentially could stop them getting in or out. Now, as we look down the road in front of us, we can see we have none of those markings at all. So what we're going to do is drive down and we're going to pull up, which we can see just before the junction in the distance there. So we're not going to go very far. We just want to practice moving off and then pulling up. So how do we do the pulling up? Well, the first thing, if you look at the bottom picture, is our mirrors. So again, we're going to use the center mirror to see what's behind and how close. We're going to check the left mirror to see if anything's coming up the inside of us, such as motorbikes, e-scooters, anything like that. Once we see it's clear, we're going to signal down. We're going to steer 10, then 2, then 12, which will bring us close to and parallel with the curb. We're going to start to gently brake, clutch down, come to a stop. We're going to put the handbrake on. We're going to go into neutral, relax our feet, and we're going to breathe. Any questions with that so far, Chris? Anything that you don't get or would like me to explain again? So to know that we're in a good position when we pull up, before we move off, Chris, what I want you to do is get a focal point or a reference point. So I want you to look at the curb on the left, follow it back towards the car. Where does it meet the front of the car? Where does it meet the dashboard? Now, every pupil will have a different viewpoint, so just ask them where it is. So as we follow it back towards the car, Chris, where does that curb meet the front? Where does it meet the dashboard? And they might say it's by the block on the wiper blade, which is fine, but it is worth remembering and telling the pupil that if it was raining, those wiper blades would be moving. So it's better if it's perhaps in the middle of the dashboard to use that as a fixed point rather than use the windscreen wipers, which on the day of your ADI Part 3 or ADI Standards check test could be moving from left to right. So again, an important focal point or reference point so that they know every time they pull up exactly where the curb should be with the front of the car. And the reason we want to use the front of the car rather than the side mirror is if they're looking in the side mirror and the car is heading towards the curb and the lamppost, and they're just looking in that left side mirror, then at the point where they reach the curb, mount it and smack into the lamppost, they'll be looking in that left mirror going, oh, I've got another 6 feet yet. So it's always better to use the reference point at the front of the car because that's the direction that you're heading in. When the pupil is more experienced, then people often wonder, well, how do we do the briefing? Well, in the same way, just question and answer. We can refer back to what we did last time and say, so when we pull up at the side, can you remember what our focal point or reference point is as we look ahead? Do you remember why we need to look ahead to get that reference point rather than look in our left mirror when pulling up? So of course, then we need to listen to their answers, see if what they're saying is correct. If not, we can delve into it a little further, but we're getting them involved. And that really is the gist of the client-centered approach, rather than us as driving instructors continually telling them what to do. We want them to think for themselves, to start analyzing things for themselves, and that way they understand the subject better and therefore become better drivers. The other great thing with using a briefing folder is because you use it repetitively, it helps sink in these routines such as POM, preparation, observation, move, so that you've got it in your head. Then you can be watching the pupil to look out for any faults that they do or any potential faults they might be about to do. And the briefing folder really helps with that. And what we're going to quickly do is just look at a couple of examples of this. So here in our first clip, the pupil is getting ready to drive off. So the instructor is telling her, remember, preparation. So into first gear. Now, on this first one or two, it's not too bad, but the potential fault here is the pupil is looking down at the gear stick. Now, if this continues, you'd be surprised how many pupils actually, when they're driving, sit and look at the gear whilst traveling. This is something we want to get them out of the habit of. So what we can actually do is, rather than carry on, is bring out the point. What do you think the problem is going to be if, when we're driving, we're constantly looking down at our gears to change them? Are we going to be paying attention to the road ahead? So instead of carrying on, it would be better at this point to just let the pupil get used to changing gear, asking them to go first to second, second to third, third to fourth, without checking third to first, second to first. And that way, you're helping the pupil not only analyze the fault, but to fix the fault before it becomes an ingrained habit. So that was preparation. Now observation. The instructor has asked our pupil to check the mirrors. Do you notice the fault? The pupil has gone straight for the driver's side mirror rather than the center mirror. The problem with that is that the glass in the driver's side mirror is convex. Do you remember? So it makes things look smaller and further away than they actually are. So if our pupil is trying to assess the gap as to whether it's safe to go or not, then just checking that side mirror is not the correct thing to do. So again, if we spot this, we can stop the pupil, we can analyze what the fault is, and then we can help them fix it by making sure they check the center mirror first and then the right mirror. So watching for the pupil's faults, again, is helped by going through the routines in the briefing folder. So we've done preparation, observation. Now it's time for movement. So the pupils in first, they've got the bite point ready, and then, as so often happens, the dreaded stall. So again, with this, it may seem obvious of what they've done, but is it because they've lifted the clutch up too quick? Is it because they were in the wrong gear? Is it because they've kept the handbrake on? Is it because their foot is on the foot brake as they're lifting the clutch up? So it's not just as obvious as we may think at the beginning. We need to think what caused that fault. Then, whatever the problem is, we need to analyze it and then help the pupil fix it. So that's the end to our quick guide for an ADI briefing or ADI standards check briefing on moving off and stopping. If you've liked what you've seen, you can get yourself one of the ADI lesson plan briefing folders, or even our guide to the ADI Part 3 and ADI standards check test. The links are in the description below. My name's Chris. Thanks for joining us. Remember to teach well, drive safely, and we'll see you all again soon in our next video.